Welcome to Sermon Sunday, the weekly podcast from Abingdon United Methodist Church. I'm Pastor Paul. Each week, we explore Scripture and share a message to help you grow in faith and live out Christ's love. Whether you're listening on your commute or at home, we're glad you're here. Let's get into this week's message.
I was so grateful for Lucy Maynard, who came to preach last week and to share about the ministry of Camp Dickinson. I just thought she did a fantastic job on both fronts, and I see you all nodding your head. She did such a good job that after church, I had a number of people tell me that that was the favorite sermon that I have preached that they have heard in a long time. So I'll pass that along to her. And some even came to church today and said, where's the woman who preached last week? We were hoping she would be back. Oh, it's you again. Okay. I have a question, and the question is, have you ever seen someone that you didn't expect to see? Have you ever seen someone that you didn't expect to see? When I was in first grade, my family went to Disney World in the summer. And in Disney World, there were 17.5 million people there. I counted. There were 17.5 million people there. And I saw a girl from my first grade class who'd traveled all the way from East Tennessee to Florida to go to Disney World. It's happened to me lots in my lifetime. On a couple of occasions, I have been in New York City and have run into people that I know. Unplanned, unexpected. One time in Times Square. Another time, Kathleen and I were in Manhattan for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And we were crossing the street, and I passed by somebody that I knew, and we stopped and we talked. It's really wild, isn't it, when you see someone that you don't expect to see? Have you ever had unexpected company? Unexpected company sometimes can make you go, yay, and then make you go, oh, the house is not ready. And come on in. We'll just move that out of the way. And, oh, I don't have anything in the refrigerator, but we're glad you're here. We're glad you're here. I was at a surprise birthday party recently, and the guest of honor came in, and the crowd, big crowd, yelled, surprise! And the guest of honor looked at all these people that he knew, and he looked at his wife, and he said, what are they doing here? And she said, your birthday? Oh, happy birthday! But when you don't expect to see people, it throws you off. A couple years ago, I was in the grocery store. I was in the back of the store. I was in the meat section. If you really need to know, I was in the poultry section. And have you ever had an experience you sort of rise above it? It's almost like you become the drone footage and you watch something happen. And there was a woman who was a lot older than me who was trying to figure out what package of chicken she was going to buy, and she was looking very closely. And there was another woman about her age pushing a buggy, and she realized that she knew this woman. And I just sort of saw it happen. I could just script it in my head. This woman saw her friend, and she said, I'm going to speak to my friend. I'm going to surprise my friend. So she went over to the woman who was looking at the chicken, and she put her hand on her shoulder, and instead of turning around and saying, oh, so good to see you, the woman who was holding the package of chicken dropped it and curled her hand into a fist and turned around and swung. And the other woman, Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, kind of went, whew, like that, and it barely missed, and oh my goodness. And then they realized what had happened, but I've often wondered, what if that punch had connected? I mean, imagine the headlines, a brawl in the, anyway. Maybe be careful when you surprise people. In today's passage, Jesus shows up unexpectedly. The disciples have gathered together in fear. That's the only reason they've gathered. They've gathered to huddle together. They've gathered to hide. And maybe they've gathered to figure out how to get out of town safely. They didn't expect to see Jesus. They did not invite Jesus because Jesus was not a possibility for them. Jesus was dead. The other thing you need to know is they didn't summon Jesus. Look back at the passage. They don't hold hands. Everybody say Jesus 3 times and he will appear. No. They are consumed by their fear. They're consumed by their grief. And he just shows up. There's no drum roll. He comes unbidden, unsummoned. He just shows up. I've heard so many sermons on this passage criticizing the disciples for locking the doors, chastising them for being afraid, speaking poorly about them for their lack of faith. They should have known better. They should have known better. They shouldn't have locked the doors. They shouldn't have been afraid. Do you know where I've heard these sermons? They've come out of my own mouth. I've been the one who has said those things, and I've been wrong. I think I've been wrong, because I think the point of the story is not about what the disciples should or shouldn't do. The point of the story is about what Jesus does and who Jesus is. He comes to them just like he comes to us when we're terrified. When this life is too much and we lock the doors of our hearts and we don't even think to cry out to him, that's when he comes to us. He comes to us when we're terrified. He comes to us just as he comes to them when they've given up. When we've given up on him, that's when he comes to us. He comes to us when we're weak. And thank God he doesn't wait until we have it all together. He doesn't say the prerequisite is you've got to get your act together, then I'll show up. He comes to them. He comes to us in our fear, in our loss, in our disbelief. It's actually a pattern that I see in other biblical stories, especially stories of the resurrection. Do you all remember the story of the walk to Emmaus, where the two disciples are leaving Jerusalem to go to the village called Emmaus? They're going to Emmaus. It looks like they're going to Emmaus because they're leaving it all behind. They're going to Emmaus. They're sad on the way. They talk about how they had hope, but they've lost hope. They're leaving it all behind. And that's when they meet Jesus, the stranger. Or earlier in this chapter, of chapter 20 of John, Mary Magdalene stands outside the tomb of Jesus, and she's weeping. She's crying. She's crying because Jesus is dead. She thinks his body has been stolen. She's crying because of what was. She's not crying. She's not standing there saying, oh, I hope Jesus is here somewhere. He's not a possibility. He's not on her radar. And then she hears footsteps behind her. And she turns around and she sees someone, but she doesn't recognize that it's Jesus. She thinks it's a gardener. And then he says what? He says her name, Mary. And she recognizes him. The point is not don't be like these people. The point is we are like these people. We are. We are afraid. We are hiding. We are running away. We are weeping. The whole world is like that. And he comes to us in our fear, in our fleeing, in our weeping. I've got good news and I've got bad news. Did anybody come here hoping to hear good news? Anybody? I got good news. The good news is Jesus is alive. Amen? Jesus is alive. That's the good news. The bad news, the hard news is Jesus is alive, but we don't control Jesus. That's the hard news. Jesus is alive, but we don't get to control when he shows up, where he shows up, how he shows up. Good news and bad news. I've been at this preaching business long enough to hear very often things like this. We'll be getting ready for an event, an outdoor event, say a barbecue in the church parking lot, something like that. And somebody will say, well, Pastor, we'll take care of the food. We'll take care of setting up the tables. Pastor, you take care of the weather. Okay. I served in a farming community at one point, and the drought was very bad one summer, and the farmers were really concerned about their hay, about their animals, about their land, about their crops. And the joke that they would say, and this is an old joke, they say, well, somebody forgot to pay the preacher. Somebody forgot to pay the preacher. You ever hear that? Somebody forgot to pay the preacher. That's why it's snowing, that's why it's raining, that's why it's not raining. And I would just say, look, folks, if I had that kind of power, y'all will never see me again. You better be glad I don't have that kind of power. We don't control how and when he shows up. We're going to have communion here in a moment, and Jesus has promised to be with us at this table. But we don't get to say how he's present. We don't get to say he's just present here and not there. We don't get to make it happen. I don't want you to misunderstand that in a moment when we say a certain prayer, when we lift the cup, when we break the bread, We're not making him present. That's not me snapping my fingers and saying, now he's here. He shows up in his own way, in his own time. Sometimes it's in beautiful, precious kinds of moments. Other times it's in funny moments where something happens that's unexpected. Sometimes it's in moments of great reverence. There's a woman I got to be pastor for years, and after every communion Sunday, she would always just say, Pastor, that was beautiful. That was beautiful. And I'd say, what was it that was beautiful? She said, just the service of communion. It's just beautiful. Sometimes maybe it's just years and years of going through the motions. Coming to the table, hands open, receiving the bread, receiving the cup, and then you look back over the long haul and you realize the faithfulness of God over time. There's a hymn writer named William Cowper, spelled Cowper, but pronounced Cooper, they tell me. He wrote the hymn in our hymnal, There is a Fountain Filled with Blood. He wrote the hymn, God Moves in a Mysterious Way. William Cowper suffered with what today we would probably call clinical depression. There were days and days when he didn't get out of bed. There were days when he was deep in a dark place. But he would scribble down things in his darkness, and when he came out, he would write them down. And this is one of those hymns. It's called Sometimes a Light Surprises. Sometimes a light surprises the child of God who sings. It is the Lord who rises with healing in his wings. When comforts are declining, he grants the soul again a season of clear shining to cheer it after rain. In holy contemplation, we sweetly then pursue the theme of God's salvation and find it ever new. Set free from present sorrow, we cheerfully can say, let the unknown tomorrow bring with it what it may. Sometimes a light surprises. There's a story that I heard years ago about missionaries that went to South America. They went to a remote part of South America taking medicine, taking school supplies, and taking Bibles and teaching people about Jesus. And they went from remote village to remote village. And all they had for their mode of transportation was an old beat-up Jeep. And the Jeep didn't have windows. It didn't have much of a roof on it, but it had the tires that could get over those big rocks in the road. They left one village in the evening to drive through the night to get to another village. And while they were on their way, the Jeep just quit running. It just broke down. Now, these people were talented in medicine. They were talented in education. They were talented in preaching, but not a one of them was talented as a mechanic. And they were stuck, and they realized they hadn't seen any cars coming either way, and they may well be there for a long time. They were in a remote area on a very forlorn road in the middle of the forest. They didn't know what was out there, and they were scared. And they sat there, and they sat there. And in the back seat, out of nowhere, one of them just began, Amazing grace, how sweet a sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace. They didn't feel amazing. They didn't feel like there was much grace. They sang on through many dangers, toils, and snares, and they finally just went to sleep, and the morning came, and they were rescued, and they were back at camp, and they were talking about their experience, and one of them said to the man who had been singing, "Thank you for doing that. I'm glad you thought to cheer us up with the song." He said, I just started, the song found me. The song found me. Have you ever had that, where the song finds you? Sometimes the song finds you. Good news is Jesus is alive. The bad news is we can't control it. But the bad news is also good news because we can't control it. It's bigger than us. It's greater than us. I had what I can only describe as a very, very bad customer service experience a while back. It wasn't in this town. It wasn't even in this state. So don't worry. Don't go looking on Main Street for it was in another place. But it was a very bad customer service experience. It boiled down to this: I am very nice, and this person was very rude. How's that? I was being very patient, and this person was being sarcastic and not helpful. And I wanted to just leave, but I had to make this purchase. And I thought, well, I'm going to make this purchase, but I'm going to make this a memorable purchase. I'm going to tell that you do not treat people like this. You do not talk to me like this. Do you know who I am? I work with Glenn Patterson. Do you know who I am? And I had it all ready. But something came over me, and I held my tongue, and I made the purchase. And the sales associate said, "I'm sorry for the confusion." And I thought in my head, and it almost came right out of my mouth, there is no confusion. There's no confusion here. But I didn't say it. And I learned that that little store was closing and that this person was losing her job. And I thought, okay, what do you have planned next? I don't know. I've been looking. It's not gone well, and honestly, I'm having a hard time with this. I've worked here for 10 years. I've given my life to this. I've become attached, and I just don't know. I just don't know what's next. And I said, well, I'm sure something good will come your way. I hope it will come soon. And I left. But as I was leaving, I swear, there's only two of us in that little store. I saw a figure walk across the back of the room, and I thought I recognized him. And I got to the car, and I said, "Jesus, you weren't supposed to be there." But he was already gone. He was already gone. But had he lingered, I think he probably would have said, "Peace be with you. Peace be with you." Jesus is alive. Amen.